It started like any other morning. Buddy, the golden Labrador, ran out of the misty woods with another strange rock clamped proudly in his mouth. His owner barely glanced up at first. The dog had been doing this for days, collecting what looked like bits of melted glass from the forest floor. But something about these stones felt different, too smooth, too deliberate. It wasn't until Ethan looked closer that he realized something was very, very wrong. Buddy trotted up the porch steps with something clamped gently in his mouth. His golden fur was damp from the morning dew, and his tail moved back and forth with the steady rhythm of excitement. Ethan Cole stood at the doorway with his coffee in hand and watched his dog approach. He thought Buddy had found another stick from the woods behind the house, but when the dog stopped in front of him and dropped the object at his feet, Ethan frowned. It was not a stick. He crouched down and picked it up. The thing was a rock, or at least it looked like one. It was smooth and heavy and had an odd shine that caught the light when he turned it in his hand. The surface almost looked melted, like glass that had been through fire. He turned it once more, rubbed away a bit of dirt with his thumb, and then shrugged. "Good boy, Buddy," he said softly, though his voice sounded empty even to him. He set the rock aside and went back inside. Buddy barked once, proud of his find, then lay down near the porch rail. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the sound of distant crows echoed across the woods. The air smelled of damp pine and smoke from someone's fireplace down the road. Ethan stood for a while by the window with his coffee cooling in his hand and watched the fog slide across the treetops. It was the kind of morning that used to make him feel alive. Now it only made him feel how quiet things had become. The next morning, Buddy came back with another one. Ethan was sitting on the porch steps, staring out at nothing, when the dog appeared again with that same proud look. Another smooth stone dropped onto the porch beside the first. By the end of the week, there were 7 of them in a small, uneven pile near the steps. Each one was a little different. Some had colors deep in the stone, faint streaks of red or green. Others looked like glass that had cooled too fast. Ethan did not know what to make of them, and he did not care much. He had not cared about much of anything for a long time. The house behind him had once been warm. His wife Claire had filled it with the kind of life that made every room glow. When she was alive, there had always been music playing somewhere, and the smell of something baking in the kitchen. She used to hum a quiet tune that wrapped around him like sunlight whenever she cooked. She laughed easily, and her laugh had a way of turning even bad days into good ones. They had tried for 7 years to have a child, and each year the hope had risen and fallen until it finally faded away. When they gave up, Claire brought home a golden retriever puppy. She said the dog would fill the silence. She was right. Ethan could still remember the first day they brought Buddy home. The puppy had been all paws and ears, tripping over himself as he explored every corner of the living room. Claire had sat cross-legged on the living room floor, laughing so hard that tears welled up in her eyes as Buddy clambered clumsily into her lap and began tugging at her shoelaces with determined little growls. Ethan had not laughed that hard in years. In that small, sunlit moment, it felt as though life had cracked open a new door for them. And from that day on, Buddy became the center of their world. They both fell completely in love with him. He was such a wonderful dog, bright, affectionate, endlessly curious. And there was always something about him that made them laugh until their sides ached. Buddy became like the child they had never been able to have. He followed them from room to room, curling up beside them on the couch, waiting by the door when they went out, and bringing them joy in ways they had never imagined. They spoiled him shamelessly with treats, toys, and affection, and in return he gave them a love so pure it filled every empty space in their hearts. Those were the happiest days of their lives, filled with the simple beauty of companionship and laughter. Ethan often found himself wishing that those moments could stretch on forever, untouched by time or sorrow. But fate had other plans. One quiet afternoon, barely 2 years after Buddy became part of their home, Claire suddenly collapsed while working in her office. She was rushed to a hospital, where the doctors pronounced her dead from a heart attack. To Ethan, it felt as if the world itself had stopped breathing. The music ended. The house fell still. He kept her sweaters by the door and her shoes under the bench. Her mug stayed on the counter where she had left it, For months he had moved through the days as if walking underwater. Ethan kept working at first. He was an accountant at a small firm in town. He tried to keep up, but his mind would wander. He made mistakes. Numbers blurred on the page. His boss called him in one morning and told him they were letting him go. That was 5 months after the funeral. After that, Ethan stopped trying. The days blurred together. The mail piled up. The phone went unanswered. He sometimes thought about ending things quietly, without drama. He would imagine what it would feel like to finally rest, to stop fighting the ache that never left. But every time he looked down and saw Buddy watching him, he could not bring himself to do it. The dog followed him everywhere, as if afraid that if he looked away for a moment, Ethan might disappear. That was why he noticed the rocks at all, because Buddy brought them, and Buddy was all he had left. One cold afternoon, Ethan picked up one of the stones and turned it over in his hand again. He carried it inside and set it under the lamp. The light caught something strange inside the stone. It was not dull like a normal rock. It shimmered faintly like there was metal or glass fused within. He rubbed at it with a rag and saw streaks of green running through clear material. It looked almost like melted quartz. Curiosity stirred in him for the first time in months. It was a small feeling, but it was alive. He turned the rock in his hands again and again, wondering how something so ordinary-looking could be so beautiful when cleaned. He thought about the way Claire had marveled at small things, the curve of a flower petal, the pattern of frost on a window, and felt a pang of both longing and comfort. It was as if she had left him little threads to follow, subtle guides back to life, even from the other side. The next morning, he decided to follow Buddy. He pulled on his coat and boots and called the dog to him. "Show me where you're getting these, boy." Buddy barked once and started off toward the trees. Ethan followed. They crossed the backyard and moved into the woods behind the property. The air was damp and cold, and the ground was dark from recent rain. They walked deeper than they had ever gone before. The trees grew close together, and the light faded until it felt like dusk even though it was still morning. Ethan could feel the crunch of wet leaves beneath his boots, and each sound seemed louder in the thick quiet. He became aware of how his senses, dulled by months of grief, were slowly reawakening. The earthy smell of the forest, the cool touch of the wind on his face, and the rustle of animals unseen all began to feel real again. Ethan felt a strange unease the farther they went. The forest had always been a comfort to him when Claire was alive. They used to walk the trails on weekends, stopping by the creek where she liked to skip stones. But this part of the woods felt different. It was quiet in a way that did not feel peaceful. Even the birds were silent. He felt almost as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something he could not see. After a while, the soil under Ethan's boots began to change. It was black and brittle, not like the brown earth near the house. When he knelt to touch it, it crumbled like ash. The air smelled faintly burnt. He remembered stories Claire had told him about strange lands and forgotten fires, tales she wove into bedtime stories with a sparkle in her eyes. Now, years later, he felt that same eerie fascination mixed with apprehension. Buddy sniffed at the ground and then started pawing at a small mound. Ethan watched as the dog dug until something hard scraped under his claws. Ethan got down beside him and brushed the dirt away with his hands. A rusted piece of iron emerged, curved like part of an old stove or drum. Nearby were shards of glass that looked melted, as if they had been through intense heat. Ethan's chest tightened. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, like a quiet reminder that things can be lost and buried for decades, yet leave traces that still speak to the living. The strange rocks were scattered all around. Each one seemed to whisper faintly of their past, though he could not hear the words. Ethan picked one up and held it to the light that filtered through the trees. It had that same glassy sheen. Something had burned here a long time ago. He stood there for a while and wondered what kind of fire could have done this. He imagined a small cabin filled with treasures, someone carefully cataloging and dreaming, only to have it all vanish in smoke and ash. He gathered a few pieces and brought them home. That night he cleaned them one by one. Under the grime they gleamed faintly. He searched online for minerals that could look like melted glass. The closest match he found was a type of quartz that could form under high heat, sometimes mixed with other minerals. But that did not explain the variety of colors or the metallic veins that ran through some of them. Each stone seemed to hum with its own story. and Ethan found himself imagining the life that had touched them. The next day he went to the library. It had been years since he had set foot in that old brick building downtown. The air smelled of paper and dust. He asked the librarian about old records of fires or mining activity in the area. She pointed him to a small archive room in the back. Ethan ran his fingers over the spines of fragile volumes, the way he used to trace the outlines of Claire's hands, and felt a connection to something beyond his solitude. He spent hours looking through old newspaper reels and clippings. Most were small-town stories, fairs, missing pets, and farm reports. Then he found a yellowed clipping from 1958. The headline read, "Cabin Fire Claims Local Geologist Harold Beecham, 63, Presumed Dead." The short article said Beecham had been an amateur prospector who lived alone in a one-room cabin deep in the woods off Cedar Creek Road. He had spent decades collecting raw gemstones and minerals from the nearby hills. Neighbors said his cabin was filled with boxes of stones and notes about his discoveries. When the cabin burned down one winter night, both Beecham and his collection were lost. The cause of the fire was never determined. Ethan sat back in his chair and stared at the page. His hands trembled slightly. A mixture of awe and sorrow coursed through him. He whispered the name aloud, Harold Beecham. The woods Buddy had led him to were near Cedar Creek Road. He felt a faint chill travel up his arms. He thought of the old man, lonely and obsessed, surrounded by beauty that the world would never see. There was a strange kinship in imagining Beecham's solitude. That night he could not sleep. The wind howled outside and the trees scratched the siding. Buddy lay at the foot of the bed, breathing softly. Ethan turned the rock in his hand again and thought about the man who had once lived out there alone, surrounded by his stones. He wondered if Beecham had been lonely too. He wondered if anyone had missed him. He wondered if, like him, the man had needed a companion, even if it was only in the form of quiet observation of the world. The next morning, he packed a small shovel, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee. He called Buddy and set out again. They followed the same path through the woods until they reached the ashy clearing. Ethan began to dig near the spot where they had found the metal piece. The soil was soft and he could tell it had been disturbed long ago. Buddy sniffed and pawed at one corner, then began digging furiously. Ethan joined him, clearing the dirt as fast as he could. After a few minutes, his shovel hit something solid. It made a dull metallic sound. He cleared more soil and uncovered the edge of a box. It was about the size of a bread loaf, covered in rust but still intact. A small lock hung broken on the front. Ethan lifted it out carefully. His hands were shaking. Buddy whined softly, watching him. He set the box on the ground and pried it open with the edge of his shovel. Inside were several wrapped bundles. Within the wrappings were uncut gemstones, raw sapphires, bits of garnet, small emeralds, even flakes of what looked like gold dust clinging to the fabric. Ethan stared at them in silence. For a moment he could not breathe. It was as if a door had opened in the world he thought was long closed. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, not just for the stones, but for the sense of wonder they brought back. The sight of those stones made his chest tighten. He sat in the dirt and cried quietly with his hands trembling over the open box. Buddy pressed close against him and rested his head on Ethan's knee. Ethan stayed there until the light began to fade. Then he gathered the box, covered the hole again, and carried everything home. He spent the night cleaning the stones one by one under the same lamp where he had cleaned the first rock. The gems caught the light and reflected it across the walls. He found himself smiling for the first time in years. For the first time since Claire's passing, he felt that delicate thrill of life returning, as if each stone carried a fragment of hope that had been buried along with Beecham's dreams. He decided to report the find the next morning, and in the quiet of the night, with Buddy at his side, he allowed himself a thought he had not dared to feel for a long time, that maybe, just maybe, life could surprise him again. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. Buddy was already awake, sitting beside the bed and looking at him with his calm, steady eyes. Ethan reached down and ran his hand through the dog's fur. He made coffee and carried the box of stones to the kitchen table. The gems glittered faintly under the morning light. Ethan picked up a sapphire and turned it over in his hand. He had never held anything so beautiful, so alive. He felt a strange connection to the man who had collected them, Harold Beecham, and a surge of gratitude for Buddy, who had led him here. By mid-morning he had contacted the local geologist society. Experts came to the house and carefully examined the stones. They confirmed what Ethan already suspected. The gems were real, raw, and rare. The garnets were deep red. The emeralds were green like young leaves, and the sapphires like drops of twilight. Some pieces had flecks of gold trapped inside them. News of the discovery spread quickly. A small camera crew arrived the next day. Reporters asked questions while Buddy sat on the porch, tail wagging. Ethan answered as best he could, but his mind kept returning to Claire. He thought about how she would have laughed at the attention, how she would have been proud of him for keeping Buddy safe and following the strange instincts of a dog who had never led him wrong. Offers to buy the gems came soon after. Some were generous, others outrageous. Ethan did not want to sell everything. He decided to take only enough to secure a new life. He paid off the bills that had piled up since he lost his job. He fixed the house slowly, repainted old walls, replaced old appliances, and bought new furniture. Each improvement felt like a small reclaiming of life that had been stolen from him. Even with the house fixed, the real healing came in quiet moments. Ethan would sit on the porch with Buddy beside him, holding a cup of tea, and look at the stones he had kept in a small glass case. The light would catch them just right in the late afternoon, and he could see the fire that had once destroyed everything now reflected in beauty. Buddy would nuzzle his hand, and Ethan would smile for no reason at all. He used part of the money to create a scholarship in Claire's name. It was for young students studying geology. He called it the Claire Cole Memorial Scholarship, and made sure it honored curiosity, exploration, and the joy of discovering something new. He thought about Harold Beecham as he did this. The man had lived alone, obsessed with his collection, and then he had vanished. Ethan wanted to make sure that Beecham's passion, lost to time for decades, could inspire something meaningful now. The media called Buddy the treasure dog of Cedar Creek. Children came to meet him, wide-eyed and laughing. They brought sticks and treats, and Buddy accepted them all with the gentle patience only a dog could have. Ethan sometimes watched the children, thinking about the years he had spent in silence, and felt a little thrill of connection he had thought gone forever. The nights remained quiet, but they were no longer lonely. Ethan slept better with Buddy on the floor, and he could lie in bed and think of Claire without the sharp sting of grief twisting in his chest. The house no longer felt like a hollow space, but like a home filled with small miracles. The hum of the heater, the smell of tea, the soft padding of Buddy's paws. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan began to venture back into life. He went to small gatherings at the library, volunteered at local events, and reconnected with neighbors. He did not feel like the man he had been before Claire died, but he felt alive again. Buddy was always at his side, a reminder that loyalty and love could still exist even after unbearable loss. One evening, Ethan returned to the woods. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of pine and earth. He carried a small bag with him and walked to the spot where he had found Harold Beecham's lockbox. Buddy led the way without hesitation, sniffing and pawing at the ground as if he remembered everything. Ethan dug carefully and replaced a few scattered stones to mark the spot. He did not take anything this time. Instead, he said quietly, "Thank you, Harold, for letting me find this. And thank you, Buddy, for never giving up on me." The sun dipped below the horizon, and Ethan and Buddy walked home. He felt a peace he had not thought possible. He realized that the rocks Buddy had brought home were more than just stones or gemstones. They were a bridge between the life he had lost and the life he could still have. They had reminded him of wonder, hope, and the quiet miracles that happen when you least expect them. Years later, Ethan would think back to that first day Buddy brought home a rock. He would remember the shock of holding it, the strange beauty of the shimmer inside, and the way curiosity had sparked something in him that grief could not extinguish. He kept a few gems in the glass case on the mantel, beside Claire's photograph. They caught the light every morning, reminding him that life could be both fragile and brilliant at the same time. Buddy slept near the hearth, older now, fur streaked with gray but still loyal and gentle. Ethan would reach down, scratch behind his ears, and say softly, "We found it together, Buddy. We found it together." Sometimes history does not want to stay buried. Sometimes it only waits for the right pair of paws to bring it home. Ethan often thought that Buddy had done more than lead him to a treasure. He had led him back to life itself, and in that quiet realization, he finally felt the world had room for joy again, room for love again, and room for miracles that arrive in the most unexpected ways. What do you think about this story? Comment down below.